The court called it fraud on an unprecedented scale. The media called me a monster. My wife called a lawyer. And the millions who once trusted me? They called me every name you can imagine. And they were right. But they don't know the whole story. They don't know about the promise I made long before I was rich enough to break it. My hands, they're not what they used to be. They're rougher now. There's soil under the nails again. Calluses forming where they once held $100 pens and shook the hands of billionaires. Today, I was kneading dough. Just flour, water, salt, yeast. The most basic, honest things in the world. As I worked it, feeling it come to life under my palms, I was hit by a wave of memory so powerful, it almost brought me to my knees. It smelled like the beginning. It smelled like the truth. They used to call me Jonathan Sterling, the king of clean food. My face was on the packaging of over 200 different products in every grocery store from California to Maine. I built an empire, Solstice Foods, from a folding table at a farmer's market into a $500 million corporation. I built it on a single powerful idea: trust. People believed in me. They believed that when they saw my smiling face on a box of organic granola or a jar of applesauce, they were getting something pure, something real, something safe for their families. For a long time they were. For a long time I believed it more than anyone. To understand how I fell, how I became the architect of one of the biggest betrayals in corporate history, you have to understand the man I was, when that trust was the only thing I owned. It all started, as these things so often do, with a reaction. I grew up in the 80s, the golden age of processed everything. Food came from a box, a can, a crinkly plastic bag. My grandmother, however, was from another time. She had a sprawling garden, and I spent my summers there pulling carrots from the earth, the sweet, gritty smell of the soil filling my senses. I learned the profound difference between a tomato warmed by the sun and one that was picked green and gassed to turn red. That difference became my obsession. Food wasn't just fuel, it was connection. It was life. When I was 25, full of fire and a healthy dose of arrogance, I saw a world that had forgotten this. I saw parents, good people, feeding their kids sugary cereals and chemical-laden snacks because it was easy, because it was what was available. And I thought, I can fix this. That's where Chloe came in. Chloe was my business partner, my other half in this crusade. I was the farmer's son with the vision. She was the marketing prodigy who knew how to turn that vision into a story people wanted to be a part of. We met at a local food co-op. I was passionately ranting about the dishonesty of commercial bread, and she just walked up to me and said, "So what are you going to do about it?" A week later, we pooled our meager savings, about $5,000 between us, and founded Solstice Foods. The name was her idea. A solstice marks a turning point, a change of season. That's what we wanted to be. Our mission was simple, almost laughably so in today's world: radical transparency. We wanted to sell food where you could trace every single ingredient back to the farm, back to the very soil it grew in. Our first product was an oatmeal cookie. Sounds simple, right? But for us, it was a declaration of war. The oats came from a family farm in Vermont we'd visited ourselves. The honey was from a local apiary run by a man named George, whose hands were as weathered as an old tree. The flour was stone ground at a historic mill. We put the names of the farms right on our hand-stamped paper bags. It was insane, unprofitable, and the most honest thing I'd ever done. We'd wake up at 3 a.m. every Thursday, bake for 6 hours in my tiny apartment kitchen, and then drive to the biggest farmer's market in the city. We'd set up our little folding table, our hand-painted signs swinging in the breeze, and we'd sell. More than that, we'd talk. We told people about George the beekeeper, about the Miller family's oat fields. We weren't selling a product, we were sharing a piece of its soul. And people were hungry for it. Not just for the cookies, but for the story, for the trust. This is the part of the story we all love, isn't it? The honest beginning, the struggle, the dream, the pure, uncorrupted passion. If you believe that a true passion is the most important ingredient for any kind of success, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see just how far these stories of a simple dream can travel. For 2 years, that was our life. Long hours, little pay, and the constant, gnawing fear of failure. We poured every cent we made back into the business. I remember one winter we were so broke, we lived on oatmeal and our own slightly burnt cookies for a month. But we were happy. We were building something real. We were on the side of the angels. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. A woman in a sharp business suit, who I'd seen at the market a few times, approached our table. She was a buyer for a new upscale chain of natural grocery stores. She'd tried our cookies. She'd heard our story. She said, "I want to put you in all 12 of our stores. Can you handle an order of 5,000 bags a week?" 5,000. We were baking maybe 300. My heart hammered against my ribs. Chloe, cool as ever, just smiled and said, "Of course we can." We had absolutely no idea how we would do it. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, frantically scribbling a business plan. We took out a loan, using my dad's small farm as collateral, a risk that kept me awake for the next 6 months. We rented a small commercial kitchen, hired our first 2 employees, and somehow we made it happen. Seeing our little paper bags on a real store shelf for the first time, it was like watching your child take their first step. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and it was just the beginning. The 12 stores became 50. The 5,000 bags became 50,000. We expanded our product line, granolas, jams, whole grain breads. With every new product, we held fast to our promise. Chloe and I would personally visit every new farm, walk the fields and meet the families before we'd even consider using their ingredients. Our brand became synonymous with integrity. I'll never forget the day our accountant called. He said, "Jonathan, I've just closed the books for the year. I thought you should know you're officially a millionaire." I hung up the phone and just stood there in the middle of our bustling little office. A millionaire. It didn't feel real. The number was meaningless. It wasn't paper, it was proof. Proof that our crazy idealistic dream wasn't so crazy after all. Proof that people still valued honesty. I was 32 years old. I was passionate, I was driven, and I felt like I was making the world a slightly better place, one organic cookie at a time. I bought my dad a new tractor. I proposed to my girlfriend. I was on the cover of an industry magazine, standing in a golden field of wheat, the sun setting behind me. The headline read, "Jonathan Sterling, The Honest Harvest." I looked at that photo, at that confident, idealistic young man, and I thought, we did it. We're changing the world. We weren't just selling food, we were selling trust, and business was booming. That photograph on the magazine cover, it became a kind of icon. For a while I even had it framed in my office. Looking back, I see it for what it was, the last picture ever taken of that man, because the person I became in the 5 years that followed was someone he wouldn't even recognize. The world of folding tables and 3 a.m. baking sessions didn't just fade away. It was obliterated by the sheer velocity of our success. The honest harvest gave way to a golden one, and I was too mesmerized by the glimmer to notice the seeds of rot I was planting with my own 2 hands. Solstice Foods exploded. We weren't just a brand anymore, we were a movement. Our headquarters moved from a cramped rental space to a sprawling, custom-built campus of glass and reclaimed wood, just outside the city. It was designed to be an architectural marvel, a physical manifestation of our brand, open, airy, and transparent. We had an on-site organic farm, a Michelin-starred employee cafeteria, and yoga studios. From the outside, it was paradise, a temple dedicated to clean living. From the inside, it was a pressure cooker. My life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. I no longer visited farms. I flew to global food summits. I no longer needed dough. I negotiated multi-million-dollar distribution deals. My days became a blur of board meetings, shareholder calls, and media appearances. I became a fixture on morning talk shows, the friendly, trustworthy face of the organic revolution. I'd sit on a brightly lit set, across from a smiling host, with a beautiful display of our products between us, and I'd talk about our mission and our values. And the terrifying part is, I believed every word I said. I had become the high priest of my own religion, and I was my most fervent devotee. The money was staggering. It ceased to be real. It was just numbers on a screen, abstract figures that allowed me to acquire things, a sprawling estate with its own model farm, a perfect prop for photo shoots, a collection of vintage cars I never had time to drive, a small plane to hop between meetings. It was a gilded cage, and I was its willing prisoner. I convinced myself that this luxury was simply a byproduct of the good we were doing in the world. The more successful I was, the more people we were helping live healthier lives. It was a clean, simple, and utterly false equation. The first crack in the foundation appeared not as a dramatic earthquake, but as a quiet, insidious tremor in the form of a spreadsheet. We were preparing for our biggest expansion yet, a national launch in the country's largest supermarket chain. This was the major leagues. It meant increasing our production tenfold almost overnight. The demand was a roaring inferno, and our supply chain was a bucket of water. Chloe was the first to sound the alarm. She was in charge of sourcing, the keeper of our promise. She came into my office, her face pale, her hands clutching a stack of papers. "Jonathan, it's not possible," she said, her voice strained. "There simply aren't enough certified organic, ethically sourced almonds in North America to meet these projections. Not at the quality we demand. We can't do it." I leaned back in my ridiculously expensive ergonomic chair, the city skyline spread out behind me like a kingdom. "Can't is not a word we use here, Chloe. Find a way." "There is no way," she insisted, her frustration boiling over. "Our entire brand is built on this, on the fact that we know our farmers. If we start cutting corners—" "We're not cutting corners," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "We are adapting to growth, find new farms, pay them more, whatever it takes." But it wasn't that simple. You can't conjure a certified organic farm out of thin air. It takes years of cultivation, of nurturing the soil, of building a delicate ecosystem. It takes time. And time was the one thing our new retail partners and our shareholders would not give us. That's when Marcus walked in. Marcus was our CFO, a man I'd hired from a ruthless private equity firm. He was brilliant, detached, and saw the world not as a garden to be tended, but as a series of assets to be leveraged. He heard the tail end of our conversation and cleared his throat. "There might be another option," he said, his voice calm and smooth as polished granite. He placed a single folder on my vast oak desk. "Global AgroSource. They're a consortium based in Asia. They can supply all the almonds, oats, and dried fruits we need at 30% less than our current cost. They can meet any volume on demand." I opened the folder. Inside were spec sheets, pricing tables, and a glossy, professional-looking organic certification. "Are they legitimate?" I asked, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "Have we vetted their farms, their labor practices?" Marcus gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "Their paperwork is impeccable. They are certified by an international body that is recognized. It will pass any legal or regulatory muster. That's what matters for the packaging." The subtext hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Their paperwork is impeccable, not their practices, not their ethics, their paperwork. Chloe saw it immediately. "Absolutely not," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Jonathan, this is everything we fought against. This is a faceless corporation, not a family farm. We have no idea how they treat their workers or what they spray on their fields when the inspectors aren't looking. This is a betrayal of every single customer who trusts us." She was right. Every fiber of the young man who started a company at a farmer's market was screaming in agreement. But that young man was buried deep beneath years of success, of ambition, of the relentless hunger for more. The CEO heard something else. He heard a solution. He heard the hum of the growth engine, the roar of the market. "It would be temporary," I said, the lie tasting like ash on my tongue. I wasn't just talking to Chloe, I was trying to convince myself. Just to get us through this launch, it's a strategic bridge. Once we stabilize, we can transition back to our domestic partners. Think of it, Chloe. This deal allows us to put our products in the hands of millions more people. We're making healthy food more accessible. Isn't that a greater good? It was a masterful piece of self-deception. I had taken our sacred mission and twisted it into a justification for its own betrayal. Chloe just stared at me, her eyes filled with a profound disappointment that was worse than any anger. She saw the change in me, the one I had been refusing to see in the mirror. The greater good, she whispered, or greater profits. Don't confuse the two, Jonathan. I'm not sure you can tell the difference anymore. She turned and walked out of my office. The distance between my desk and the door suddenly felt like a canyon. That was the moment our partnership truly ended, years before we made it official. I was left alone with Marcus and the folder. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He had presented the choice, and now he was waiting for the inevitable. I picked up my pen, a heavy, gold-nibbed instrument that had been a gift for closing our IPO. I stared at the purchase order for the first shipment from Global AgroSource. An order for 10 metric tons of almonds, 10 metric tons of compromise. My hand hesitated. I saw a flash of my grandmother's garden, of George the beekeeper's weathered hands, of the pride on my father's face when I paid off his farm, all the honest, foundational things that had built this empire. And then I saw the stock price. I saw the faces of the board members. I saw the cover of the magazine, the king of clean food. A king has to keep his kingdom growing, doesn't he? I signed the order. I told myself it was just once, a clever business solution to a temporary problem. But a lie is not a bridge you can cross and leave behind. It's a seed. And once you plant it in the fertile soil of ambition and greed, it doesn't just grow. It takes over everything. I didn't know it then, sitting in my glass tower, but that simple signature was the beginning of the end. It was the first spade of dirt on the grave of the man I used to be. Temporary. It's one of the most seductive and dangerous words in the human language. It's a sedative for the conscience. It's the little white lie we tell ourselves so we can get to sleep at night. That first shipment from Global AgroSource arrived, and it was unremarkable. The almonds looked like almonds. The oats looked like oats. They passed the superficial in-house spot checks we ran, but more importantly, they were on time, they were cheap, and they were plentiful. Our national launch was a staggering success. Solstice Foods was suddenly everywhere. We were the darlings of Wall Street, the saviors of the modern grocery aisle. Our stock price didn't just climb, it levitated. And that temporary bridge I'd rationalized to Chloe and to myself, it suddenly looked like a 6-lane reinforced steel superhighway. At our next quarterly board meeting, Marcus, our CFO, presented the new margin analysis. The numbers were intoxicating. The profit we were seeing from the new globally sourced ingredients wasn't just an improvement, it was a fundamental shift in our entire business model. He looked at me, then at the other board members, and posed the question that would seal our fate. Given the extraordinary efficiency and shareholder value we've unlocked, it would be strategically foolish to revert to our previous high-cost, low-volume supply chain. We are now in a position to truly democratize organic food. That was the language we adopted. Democratizing. Scaling the mission. Making health accessible. It all sounded so noble, so righteous. It was the perfect, beautiful skin to hide the rotting carcass of our integrity. I became the chief evangelist of this new efficiency. I told myself that selling a slightly compromised product to 10 million people was a greater good than selling a pure product to 100,000. I was no longer a food maker. I was a utilitarian philosopher, weighing the needs of the many. The lie was no longer just about almonds. It spread like an invasive weed. First, it was the quinoa from a consortium in South America, with questionable labor practices. Then it was the dried cranberries, sweetened not with the apple juice we advertised, but with a barely detectable rice syrup. Then the honey, the olive oil, the spices. Within 2 years, our original vetted farmers' market supply chain accounted for less than 15% of our total ingredients. The rest came from a complex, opaque, and entirely fraudulent global network. The farm-to-table story we were selling on our packaging was no longer just a stretch of the truth. It was a complete fabrication. It was mythology. To manage this, we had to build an entirely new infrastructure within the company. We couldn't just lie. We had to prove the lie was true. Marcus and our new hyper-aggressive general counsel spearheaded the creation of what was officially called the Global Compliance Office. Its real purpose was to be our internal Ministry of Propaganda. It was a small insulated team, buried deep in the corporate structure, reporting directly to Marcus. Their sole job was to make the fake look real. They became masters of the dark art of corporate forgery. They didn't just fake supplier certificates. They created entire fictional suppliers. They built slick websites for shell companies that supposedly represented small farming cooperatives in places like Turkey or Brazil. They became experts in photo editing, taking stock images of sunny fields and happy farmers and watermarking them with our new fake company logos. They learned how to meticulously doctor laboratory test results, intercepting the real data from our quality assurance team and adjusting the pesticide residue levels from fail to pass before it hit the official record. We built a fortress of deception, a digital Potemkin village, where every PDF was a brick and every forged signature was a new battlement. It was a masterpiece of fraud, humming along quietly in the basement of the most trusted brand in America. And I, as CEO, made a point of not knowing the details. I practiced strategic ignorance. I would tell the board, I have empowered our compliance team to handle the complexities of global sourcing, which was the corporate equivalent of washing my hands. I wanted the results of the lie, but I didn't want the filth of it on my hands. Of course, the first casualty of this new religion was my partnership with Chloe. She was the ghost of our past, haunting the halls of our glass and steel headquarters. She had been our company's conscience, and in this new Solstice Foods, a conscience was not just an inconvenience, it was a liability. Our relationship, once built on shared dreams and endless laughter, became a series of tense, sterile meetings. I don't recognize this company, Jonathan, she'd say, her eyes once so bright with passion, now dull with exhaustion and disappointment. I don't recognize you. We're growing, Chloe, I'd counter, my voice hard and dismissive. I couldn't stand the judgment in her tone. This is what success looks like. It's complex, it's messy. You're still thinking like we're at a bake sale. I'm running a global corporation. We have responsibilities to our shareholders. We have a responsibility to our customers, she'd shoot back. We're lying to them every single day, every single box. She was right. And I hated her for it. I hated that she refused to evolve, that she refused to be pragmatic, that she wouldn't just get on board. So I did what all cowards in power do. I sidelined her. I used my authority as CEO and my majority stake on the board to reorganize her role. I promoted her to Chief Brand Officer, a fancy-sounding title that came with a beautiful new office and absolutely zero operational power. She was removed from sourcing, from quality, from anything that mattered. I put her in charge of special projects, which was a gilded cage where she could plan charity drives and design new company t-shirts. I isolated the one person who still knew the difference between our truth and our lie because her integrity had become a direct threat to my bottom line. But the system was getting too big, too elaborate. You can't build a fortress of lies without a few people seeing the blueprints. The real threat didn't come from Chloe. It came from a young man named Ben Carter. Ben was a junior manager in the quality assurance lab. He was exactly the kind of employee we used to build the company on. Idealistic, meticulous, and a true believer. He genuinely loved Solstice Foods. He was running a random audit, a deep-dive chemical analysis on a new batch of single-origin organic honey from one of our approved global agro-source vendors. The paperwork, crafted by our compliance team, was beautiful. It told a story of happy bees in a pristine mountain valley. Ben's tests, however, told a different story. The pollen analysis showed the honey was a cheap blend from 3 different continents, and worse, it was massively adulterated with industrial high-fructose corn syrup. Ben, being the good, rule-following employee he was, reported it to his immediate supervisor. The supervisor, who knew which way the wind blew, told him it was likely a testing error and to run it again. Ben ran it 3 more times. The results were the same. He escalated it, and his report was quietly buried by a mid-level executive. This is where a smarter man would have given up, but Ben was a believer. He thought the company had been duped by a bad supplier. He genuinely believed that I, Jonathan Sterling, the man whose face was on the wall, would want to know. He did something incredibly brave and catastrophically naive. He bypassed the entire chain of command and sent an email directly to me. He attached his lab reports, the falsified supplier documents he'd managed to find, and a simple, devastating message. Mr. Sterling, I am writing to you directly because I've encountered a serious problem, and I know you will want to make it right. The attached documents prove we are selling adulterated, non-organic honey under our label. This is a betrayal of everything we stand for. Please tell me what to do." That email hit my inbox like a grenade. I felt the blood drain from my face. For one brief, agonizing second, the old Jonathan, the farmer's market idealist, surfaced. He was horrified. He was sick. He wanted to burn everything to the ground and start over. But that man was weak, and he was buried deep. The CEO took control. The CEO didn't see a loyal employee. He saw a legal threat, a loose cannon, a problem to be managed. I didn't reply to Ben. I forwarded the email to Marcus and our general counsel with a single line: "Handle this immediately." Handling it was swift and brutal. Ben was called into an HR meeting he thought was about his findings. Instead, he was met by two of our top corporate lawyers. They didn't threaten him. They didn't even raise their voices. They were masters of a more insidious craft. They praised his diligence and his passion for the brand. They spoke of highly complex, confidential vendor disputes and proprietary trade information. They expressed gratitude for him bringing this sensitive matter to their attention. Then, they made him the offer. In light of his outstanding work, the company was awarding him a special recognition bonus of $150,000, 3 times his annual salary. He was, of course, also being promoted to a new role with more responsibility. All he had to do was sign a new, updated employment agreement. Buried in the fine print of that agreement was an ironclad, all-encompassing non-disclosure clause that covered not just this incident, but all proprietary company information in perpetuity, with crippling financial penalties for any breach. Ben was in his late 20s. He had a mountain of student debt and a new baby at home. He saw the check and he saw the steel trap. He understood the choice he was being given: complicity or destruction. He signed the papers. He took the money. When the executed agreement landed on my desk, I didn't feel relief. I didn't even feel guilt. I just felt cold. I had successfully managed a personnel crisis. I had plugged a leak. I had taken a good, honest man, the very soul of what Solstice Foods was supposed to be, and I had bought his silence. I had dragged him down into the mud with me. I remember staring out my floor-to-ceiling office window. Down below, on the perfectly manicured campus lawn, a group of employees was in a company-sponsored yoga class, finding their zen. My office wall was covered in awards for ethical business practices and corporate responsibility. It was all a set, a beautifully designed stage for a play, and I was the lead actor. I had arrived at a point of no return. The truth was no longer a virtue, it was a contagion, and I had just vaccinated the company against it. There's a strange phenomenon that occurs when you get away with something. The initial fear, the cold sweat of near discovery, doesn't linger. It recedes, and in its place, a far more dangerous emotion takes root: invincibility. Silencing Ben Carter wasn't a warning sign to me, it was proof of concept. It proved our system worked. It proved we were insulated, protected, untouchable. The fortress of lies we had built wasn't just holding, it felt impregnable. And that feeling, that godlike sense of immunity, is the final stage before the fall. It's when you stop just breaking the rules and start believing you exist above them. My life became a testament to this hubris. I had fully embraced the persona of Jonathan Sterling, the visionary CEO. I was giving keynote speeches at global conferences on the topic of conscious capitalism, standing under bright spotlights and waxing poetic about the sacred bond between a brand and its customers. I'd talk about authenticity, transparency, and purpose-driven profit. The hypocrisy was so profound, so complete, that it circled back on itself and became my reality. I would read my own press clippings, watch my own interviews, and I would nod along thinking, he's right. I had gaslit myself into believing my own mythology. This delusion reached its zenith with the conception of our most ambitious and most depraved project to date, Solstice Sprouts. It was to be our premium line of organic baby food. The idea was Marcus's, of course. His market research was, as always, brutally precise. He identified the single most emotionally driven consumer demographic: new parents. They were anxious, they were exhausted, and they would pay almost any price for the promise of giving their child the purest, safest, healthiest start in life. The brand loyalty you could build with a new mother, he argued, was priceless. "This isn't just a product line," he explained in a board meeting, his voice resonating with cold, calculated enthusiasm. "This is an emotional anchor. We become the brand that parents trust with their most precious asset. We own the cradle." Own the cradle. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine, but the genius of it was undeniable. This was the ultimate expression of our brand's promise, and it would be our most profound betrayal. There was no way, absolutely none, that we could source the volume of genuinely organic fruits and vegetables required for a national baby food launch through our dwindling network of legitimate farms. The entire Sprouts line would, from day one, be built on the same foundation of deceit as everything else, sourced from the murky depths of global agrosource and its facsimiles. We would be putting pictures of rosy-cheeked babies on jars filled with a lie. Chloe, in her gilded cage, somehow got wind of the project. She stormed into my office for the first time in months, her face a mask of fury. She wasn't just disappointed anymore. She was incandescent with rage. "Baby food, Jonathan? Are you insane?" she demanded, her voice low and trembling. "This isn't granola bars or almond butter. This is for infants. We don't know what pesticides are in those cheap purees. We don't know the heavy metal content in the soil from those unregulated farms. You are playing with children's lives for a profit margin." "That's a wild exaggeration, Chloe," I said, my voice infuriatingly calm. I refused to let her see any crack in my composure. "Everything passes regulatory standards. Our QA process is rigorous." "Your QA process is a theatrical production," she spat back. "You know it and I know it. This crosses a line, a moral event horizon. If you do this, I'm done. I will go to the press. I swear to God I will." It was the first time she had ever truly threatened me. For a moment I felt a flicker of the old fear, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold fire of my arrogance. Who would they believe? Her, a disgruntled, marginalized executive? Or me, Jonathan Sterling, the beloved face of the organic movement? It wasn't a fair fight. I had the power, the platform, and a multi-million-dollar public relations machine. She had the truth, and I had come to learn that the truth was a surprisingly weak currency in the real world. "You'll do what you think is right," I said, my voice dripping with condescension. "But I'd advise you to think about the consequences, for yourself and for the thousands of people this company employs." It was a veiled threat, and we both knew it. I was leveraging our employees' livelihoods to secure her silence. It was the lowest I had ever sunk. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and pity, then turned and walked out of my life for good. A week later, her resignation was on my desk. We settled her exit with a generous severance package, and of course, another ironclad NDA, another problem managed. With Chloe gone, there were no more dissenting voices. The launch of Solstice Sprouts became my personal crusade. I poured everything into it, and I mean everything. To fund the massive global production, the state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities, and the unprecedented marketing blitz, the company needed a massive influx of capital. We decided to take on a significant loan, but the banks wanted more collateral than the company's assets alone could provide. They wanted a personal guarantee. They wanted me to have skin in the game. Marcus presented it as a formality, a sign of my unwavering belief in the project's success. And I, drunk on my own invincibility, agreed without hesitation. I put up my entire personal fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars in Solstice Food stock, as collateral for a $250 million loan. I was all in. I had tied my own fate, my wealth, and my entire existence to the success of this single fraudulent product line. In my mind, it wasn't a risk, it was a coronation. The success of Sprouts would make me a billionaire. It would cement my legacy as a true captain of industry. The final presage, the last ignored warning before the storm broke, came from the most innocuous of sources. It wasn't a major newspaper or a television network. It was an email to our general press inbox from a man named David Chen, who ran a small independent blog called The Food Chain Detective. His readership was probably in the low thousands. He was, in the corporate world, a gnat, a nobody. His email was polite but pointed. He said he'd received an anonymous tip, along with some internal documents suggesting irregularities in our sourcing for the upcoming Sprouts line. He mentioned the name of one of our shell corporations in Turkey. He was asking for a comment. My PR team brought it to my attention as a minor nuisance. Their recommendation was to ignore it. Engaging would give him legitimacy, starve him of the oxygen of a response, and his little story would die on the vine. It seemed like sound logic. I agreed. Ignore him, I commanded. He's irrelevant. We were just days away from the global launch event for Sprouts, a lavish, multi-million-dollar affair in New York City. I was about to be on the cover of Forbes. We didn't have time for gnats. The night of the launch was the apex of my entire life. We had rented out a massive cathedral-like event space in Manhattan. The air was thick with the scent of expensive flowers and the murmur of 1,000 influential voices. Journalists, influencers, celebrities, industry analysts, everyone who mattered was there. The theme was a pure beginning, and the decor was an ethereal dream of white silk, soft lighting, and projections of sun-drenched orchards on the walls. I took the stage to a thunderous ovation. I felt like a rock star, a prophet. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras flashing, and I delivered the speech of a lifetime. I spoke of the sacred trust between a parent and a child. I spoke of our solemn promise to protect that innocence with the purest food on earth. My voice swelled with manufactured emotion. I even felt a tear well up in my eye at the perfect rehearsed moment. It was my grandest performance. I ended with the new tagline, my voice booming through the hall, "Solstice sprouts because every bite is a promise." The applause was deafening. I stood there soaking it in, a triumphant smile plastered on my face. As the lights came up, my head of PR, a woman named Jessica, rushed toward the stage, her face ashen. She was holding her phone, her hand trembling. I thought she was coming to congratulate me. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "We have a problem." "What is it?" I asked, my smile faltering. She didn't say anything. She just held out her phone. My stomach plummeted. It was a news alert from a major wire service. They had picked up a story, an exposé. The headline was searing, brutal, and unforgettable. It read, "A poisonous promise. Leaked documents reveal Solstice Foods' baby food line built on a foundation of fraud." The byline was David Chen, the gnat. He hadn't died on the vine. He had found a bigger microphone. I stood on that stage, bathed in the warm, adoring lights, surrounded by applause. I could hear people congratulating each other, see the waiters popping champagne. But for me, in that single, silent, horrifying instant, the world stopped turning. The music died. The banquet was over. And the bill, I knew with chilling certainty, was about to come due. There are moments in life that defy the normal flow of time. They stretch into an eternity of pure, crystalline horror. Standing on that stage, the applause still echoing in the vast hall, reading that headline on Jessica's phone, that was one of those moments. The world didn't just stop, it fractured. I could see everything with a terrifying, preternatural clarity. The joyful, oblivious faces in the crowd, the clinking of champagne glasses, the enormous, pristine banner behind me that read, "A pure beginning." It was all a set, a scene from a life that had, in the space of a single heartbeat, ceased to be mine. What followed was not a slow decline. It was not an unraveling. It was a detonation. The story from David Chen's obscure blog, amplified by the wire service, became a global firestorm in a matter of hours. The detonation had a name, a hashtag that would become my epitaph. Once Solstice lies. It was perfect, simple, damning, and endlessly repeatable. It was a digital plague, and my company was patient zero. Before I could even get off the stage, the phones began to light up across the room, not with congratulatory messages, but with the grim glow of breaking news alerts. A murmur rippled through the crowd, starting at the press tables and spreading like a contagion. Smiles turned to frowns. Frowns turned to looks of shock and disgust. People started gathering their things, whispering to each other, their eyes darting towards me on the stage. The energy in the room shifted from celebration to something that felt like a public execution. I was no longer a visionary. I was a spectacle. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic blur of damage control, a desperate attempt to plug 1,000 holes in a dam that had already burst. We issued a press release calling the story a baseless attack by a disgruntled former employee, a standard corporate parry that was as effective as holding up a paper shield against a tidal wave. The documents Chen had were irrefutable. They were our own internal forgeries, our doctored lab reports, our fraudulent supply chain maps, our lies weaponized against us. Everything I had built, everything that had seemed so solid and permanent just hours before, began to liquefy. And the fall was faster, more brutal than the ascent had ever been. Before I continue and tell you about the absolute bottom, about the moment I truly lost everything, I want to ask you something. If you found yourself caught up in this story, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And leave me a comment. Which lie do you think was the most dangerous? The very first one about the almonds, or the final, most audacious one about the baby food? I truly want to know what you think. The first to fall was our stock price. The market opens at 9:30 a.m. By 9:31, our stock had entered a free fall so catastrophic that trading was automatically halted. When it reopened 15 minutes later, it plunged again and again. It was a bloodbath. Decades of brand building, of cultivating trust, of becoming a staple in American homes. All of it was vaporized. Trust, I learned, is the most valuable and most fragile asset a company has. It takes a lifetime to build and a single headline to annihilate. By the end of that first day, Solstice Foods had lost over 60% of its market value. Billions of dollars vanished into the ether, and with it, my own fortune. That massive $250 million loan I had personally guaranteed, it was tethered to the value of my stock. As the stock plummeted, I was hit with a margin call. The banks, smelling blood in the water, were calling in their debt. They didn't want explanations or promises, they wanted their money immediately. But my money wasn't liquid. It was all tied up in the very stock that was now worthless. To cover the call, I had to start selling. And not just selling, liquidating. It was a fire sale of a life. The first to go was the art collection, then the vintage cars, then the vacation home in Aspen. Each sale was a desperate, humiliating transaction, a stripping away of the armor of wealth I had worn for so long. But it was never enough. The stock kept falling and the debt was a ravenous beast. The external collapse was mirrored by an internal one. The great glass headquarters, once a symbol of transparency and innovation, became a tomb. Employees walked the halls like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, their faces etched with fear and betrayal. These were good people mostly, people who had believed in the mission, who had poured their hearts into the company. And I had turned them all, unknowingly, into cogs in a machine of deceit. Their shame was my shame, magnified 1,000 times. The board of directors, the same men and women who had applauded my strategic efficiencies and cashed their dividend checks, now looked at me as if I were a leper. An emergency meeting was called. I walked into that boardroom, the same room where I had commanded respect and admiration, and I was met with a wall of cold, accusatory silence. There was no debate, no discussion. It was a simple, brutal transaction. They presented me with a single piece of paper, my resignation. I was to be terminated, effective immediately for cause, no severance, no golden parachute, just a clean public excision. They needed a scapegoat, and I was it. I signed the paper, my hand numb, and walked out of the building I had built, a pariah in my own kingdom. The most devastating blow, however, was not financial or professional. It was personal. My wife, Eleanor, had stood by me for years. She had tolerated the long hours, the endless travel, the transformation of the man she had married into a corporate entity. But she, like millions of others, had believed in the fundamental goodness of what I was doing. When the scandal broke, it didn't just break her trust in the company. It shattered her trust in me. I remember coming home that first night after being forced to resign. The house felt cavernous and cold. She was sitting in the dark in the living room, surrounded by all the beautiful, expensive things our life of lies had bought. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her voice was quiet, hollowed out, which was so much worse. "Was any of it real, Jonathan?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The mission? The talk about making the world a better place? Or was it all just this grotesque game? I had no answer, because I no longer knew myself. What could I say? That it started out real? That the lie had crept in slowly, insidiously, until it had consumed everything? They sounded like pathetic excuses, even to my own ears. I saw an interview with a mother on the news tonight, she continued, her gaze fixed on something far away. She was crying. She said she had fed our food to her baby, who has severe allergies. She trusted us. She trusted you. She trusted the man on the box. And in that moment, the full crushing weight of what I had done finally landed on me. It wasn't about stock prices or margin calls. It was about that mother. It was about the millions of people who had invited me into their homes, into their kitchens, and I had repaid their faith with a calculated, cynical deception. A week later, I was served with divorce papers. Eleanor wasn't vindictive. She didn't want a war. She just wanted out. She wanted to disconnect herself from the poison that my name had become. I didn't blame her. I had become a stranger to her, and a monster to the world. The final act of the fall was the bankruptcy. The company, crippled by lawsuits, recalls, and a complete collapse in sales, filed for Chapter 11. My own personal finances followed suit. The bank seized everything the margin call hadn't already taken. The beautiful estate with its model farm, the plane, the last of my stock holdings. Everything. The final scene of my old life took place in the kitchen of my now empty mansion. I was sitting at the massive marble island, the last piece of furniture yet to be taken. Two men from a repossession company were putting official-looking stickers on the stainless steel professional-grade appliances. They moved with a detached efficiency, not even looking at me. To them, I wasn't a fallen titan of industry. I was just a defaulted account, another name on a list. I sat there in the echoing silence, and I realized I had nothing left. Not a dollar to my name, just a mountain of debt. No company, no career, no wife. My name, once my greatest asset, was now my greatest shame. The king of clean food was dead. All that remained was Jonathan Sterling, a bankrupt, disgraced, and utterly broken man, sitting alone in the ruins of a life he had meticulously and foolishly destroyed. The bill had finally been paid in full. You would think that hitting rock bottom is a loud, explosive event. It wasn't. It was quiet. It was the deafening silence of a one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city I used to fly over without a second glance. It was the weight of a morning with nothing to do, no meetings to attend, no calls to return. It was the profound, crushing anonymity of being no one. The world hadn't just forgotten about Jonathan Sterling, the CEO. It had rendered him radioactive. My name was a punchline, a case study in business school ethics classes about what not to do. For the first year, I barely left that apartment. I was a ghost, haunted by the specter of the man I had been and the monster I had become. Depression is not a storm. It's a fog. It descends and blankets everything in a dull, grey monotony. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. I lived off the small amount of cash Eleanor had insisted I take in the divorce, an act of pity I was too broken to refuse. I watched television, endless hours of it, and saw a world that I was no longer a part of. Sometimes a commercial for a competitor would come on, showing smiling families in sun-drenched fields, and the shame would wash over me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless. The real torment was not the loss of wealth. You adjust to that. You learn to make coffee at home, to take the bus, to count your change. The real agony was the loss of identity. For 2 decades, I was Jonathan Sterling, founder and CEO of Solstice Foods. That was the answer to every question, the opening line of every conversation. When that was stripped away, what was left? I was a void, a collection of failures and regrets. The turning point wasn't a grand epiphany, it was a court order. As part of my bankruptcy settlement and to avoid criminal charges, I was sentenced to 1,500 hours of community service. My lawyer, a court-appointed public defender who looked perpetually exhausted, found me a placement. The irony was so cruel, so perfectly tailored to my specific damnation, that I almost laughed when he told me. I was to work in the kitchen of a downtown homeless shelter, St. Jude's Soup Kitchen. The man who had sold a lie of purity to the rich would now serve honest, simple meals to the destitute. The first day was a journey into a special kind of hell. The humiliation was a physical presence, a hot cloak of shame I wore. The kitchen was a chaotic ballet of steam, clattering pots, and the loud, cheerful commands of a woman named Maria, who ran the place with the authority of a five-star general. She was in her 60s, with hands that were a roadmap of a life of hard work and a gaze that seemed to see right through me, past the disgraced CEO to the hollow man inside. She didn't care who I had been. She just pointed to a mountain of potatoes. "Oh, sterling peel," she commanded. And so I did. For 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, I peeled potatoes. I chopped onions until my eyes streamed. I scrubbed pots caked with the remnants of the day's stew. It was mindless, grueling, humbling work, and it saved my life. In that kitchen, my name meant nothing. My past was irrelevant. All that mattered was whether the carrots were diced evenly, whether the floor was mopped clean. For the first time in years, I was judged not on my story, not on my brand, but on the simple, tangible results of my labor. There was an honesty in it that I hadn't experienced since those first days baking cookies in my tiny apartment. The work was real. The hunger of the people we served was real. Their gratitude was real. I started to listen, not to shareholders or marketing consultants, but to people. I listened to the stories of the men and women who came through the line each day. Stories of bad luck, of illness, of mistakes, of a world that had chewed them up and spit them out. There was no pretense here, no masks, just raw, unvarnished humanity. I began to see the world not as a market to be conquered, but as a collection of individual souls, each with their own quiet struggles and small victories. One afternoon I was serving the day's meal, a thick lentil soup. A young man, probably not much older than I was when I started Solstice Foods, came through the line. He was gaunt, his eyes tired, but he looked me square in the face. "This is good soup," he said, and for the first time he smiled. "Thank you." It was a simple phrase. Thank you. But it landed with the force of a revelation. I had received praise from the most powerful people in the world. I had been applauded by thousands. But that simple, honest thank you from a man who had nothing, for a bowl of soup that I had helped prepare, felt more valuable than all the accolades and stock options I had ever earned. Because it wasn't for the persona. It wasn't for the king of clean food. It was for me, for the work of my own 2 hands. In that moment, I had my epiphany. My great sin wasn't just lying. It was a profound failure of connection. I had spent half my life building a food company, yet I had become completely disconnected from the fundamental, sacred act of feeding another person. I became obsessed with the idea of food, the branding, the packaging, the lifestyle it represented, and in the process I had lost its soul. I was selling a story about nourishment while my own spirit was starving. The great lesson, the wisdom that cost me everything to learn, is this: integrity isn't a strategy. It's not a marketing tool. It's not something you can afford to have only when things are going well. It is the bedrock. It's the foundational ingredient in everything you build, whether it's a company, a relationship, or a life. Without it, no matter how beautiful the structure, it is hollow. It is destined to collapse. I didn't lose my empire because of a blog post. I lost it the moment I signed that first purchase order for cheap almonds. The rest was just gravity. My community service ended long ago, but I never left St. Jude's. I'm a full-time employee now. My official title is Assistant Kitchen Manager. The pay is next to nothing, but what I get in return is immeasurable. I've found a new kind of wealth, one that has nothing to do with a bank account. It's the richness of purpose, it's the satisfaction of tangible work, it's the quiet peace of knowing that, at the end of the day, I have done something honest. I no longer live in a mansion. I live in that same small apartment. It's all I need. My life is small now, but it's real. I am slowly, tentatively, rebuilding a relationship with my children. They are adults now, and they are cautious, as they should be. But we talk. We meet for coffee. I am not the titan of industry they once looked up to, but I hope they are beginning to see a father who is, for the first time in a long time, an honest man. Today my richness is measured not in market capitalization, but in the steam rising from a pot of soup. It's measured in the quiet dignity of a job well done. It's measured in the simple, profound peace that comes from having nothing left to hide. The scandal didn't destroy my life. It destroyed the lie I was living. It forced me, kicking and screaming, back to the truth. The most expensive lesson I ever learned was the simplest one. Be true. If this story, this confession, has meant anything to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that success without truth is a form of bankruptcy. And for my final request, leave a comment below and tell me the most valuable lesson you've ever learned, not in a classroom, but in the crucible of life itself. I would be honored to read your stories. Thank you for listening.